Hello and welcome to the Power of Words. I'm Buck. Usually on this channel I recite some poetry, some of my original works, and also poems by other people. I also have said that I plan on doing some short stories, but today I thought I'd read to you the first chapter of a book that I published online a while back called The Child Shall Rise. It's a science fiction novel, my first published novel, although I've started several others. I hope you'll enjoy it. On the back, the description of the book that I put says, "A young boy beginning to demonstrate remarkable abilities, an alien empath whose powers are growing, a mysterious organization led by a brilliant maniac, willing to do anything to control them, a hostile alien species that destroys all life it encounters, an interdimensional priestess who has watched the birth and death of galaxies, an ancient prophecy that will unite them all in a cosmic struggle for the fate of a universe." In a time of unprecedented technological advancement and interplanetary exchange, the expanse of the universe seems to be shrinking. Distant planets and even galaxies are becoming more accessible, offering new forms of life, new cultures, languages, resources, and new dangers. Nearly every culture from every planet has its own methods to kill and to wage war against those who are different. The ultimate question now challenging them all is how to maintain peace despite the vast differences and misunderstandings that invariably seem to lead to mistrust and conflict. Those cultures who are unable to find the answer face a future of death and destruction. In a distant future, worlds away, the rapid development of interplanetary travel has enabled many races from different worlds to come into contact for the first time. Language barriers, species tensions, culture clashes, and competition for varied resources are bringing entire systems into military conflict. Space travel has become a perilous gamble as governments declare no-fly zones around their planets and commence mass production of warships. Mistrust, fear, and hatred are threatening the balance and destiny of all life forms in the universe. But the mysterious matriarch of an ancient race of seers has received a prophecy of hope. She has forwarded this message to all planets and ships within communication range. From a distant galaxy on a tiny planet, in an insignificant sector, I have foreseen one who will rise up and pave the way to peace and unite the planets for all. All right, so that was a bit of a lengthy lead-in, but now on to Chapter 1 of A Child Shall Rise. The fifth moon of Renus Prime would slowly become invisible in the darkening sky as a lone figure approached the entryway to a large family home. Taking a deep breath to collect himself, the man pushed the door alert button. After a long moment, the door slid open with a hiss, and a man in his late 30s appeared. "Hello, may I help you?" "Good day to you, Mr. Nova. My name is William Blake. And before you ask, yes, I was named after the famous poet from Renus too." James Nova, curious as to how the stranger knew his name, but ever polite, extended his arm to shake the hand of the unexpected visitor. "What can I do for you today, Mr. Blake?" William paused, somewhat surprised by the older man's courtesy. You don't see that much anymore, he thought to himself, as he produced a government identification chip from his breast pocket. "I represent the District 14 government, and I would like, if I may, to speak to you and your wife on a matter of some importance." A good firm handshake, steady eye contact, and polite manner. James felt that this was a man to be trusted. "By all means, come in and I'll introduce you to the troops." James directed William to the lounge room, where his family was in the middle of playing the four-dimensional board game Star Quest. On every wall of the room, William saw the Nova family history spelled out in holophotos. Generation after generation, dating back many hundreds of years, were projected. Every 30 seconds, these images faded out and were replaced by new ones, in a continual loop that must have stored thousands of images. "These are good people," he thought to himself, as they stopped the game to acknowledge the stranger. "William, "This is my family," James said, unwilling and unable to disguise his pride in them. "My lovely wife, Janet. Pamela, my first. This is Roy, Gary, Bill. And over there, the little fellow, is Jared." Each member of the family took turns politely greeting their visitor. "You've done a fine job with these kids, Mr. and Mrs. Nova. It's rare to see a fully functioning family unit in this age. I'm sorry for the interruption. I don't want to take up too much of your time and disrupt your game. But is it possible to speak to just the two of you for a while?" "Of course," Janet replied. "Okay, kids, find something to do upstairs. We'll finish the game later." Jared, who was not even playing the game, was the only one to complain. "Aw, Mom!" One look from Janet was all it took to send the youngster scurrying off after his siblings. Once it was only the adults left in the room, William began. "I'd like to get straight to the point, if I may." "Please, feel free," James said. "Like I mentioned at the door, I'm a representative of District 14 government. I understand that your 4-year-old Jared has recently started kinder education, and that his education droid last week observed and recorded some, well, abnormal behaviors, to put it in the droid's words." A puzzled look came over the face of both parents. "What do you mean by abnormal behaviors?" Janet asked. "And why is this the first we've heard of it?" William appeared stunned. I'm sorry, Mrs. Nova, Mr. Nova. I had expected they would have informed you before sending me. This is highly unprofessional, and I apologize for the oversight. I never would have come if I would have known." "Mr. Blake, please. My wife and I would like to hear more about these abnormal behaviors you mentioned. And what interest could the government possibly have in a 4-year-old boy?" William was unprepared for this scenario. How do you tell parents that their child may be different from other children, and even dangerous? Gathering his composure, he began to speak. "According to the education droid's testimony and file footage from its recording scanners, your child Jared appears to be able to do unusual things with his mind." The Novas looked at each other, then back to William, and in unison asked, "What kind of things?" "I wouldn't know how to begin to explain, but I brought a hollow chip. I think it would be better for you to see for yourselves." James slowly reached out and took the chip, pausing as if to consider whether or not he wanted to play the hollow. He didn't know quite what to make of what he was hearing from William. "I think there has been some kind of mistake. My son is a completely healthy, normal little boy. I can't imagine anything could be on this chip that would convince us otherwise." James looked at his wife, and he could see the curiosity burning inside of her. He knew they had to watch it, or they would always wonder what was on that chip. "Okay, I'll admit it, we're intrigued, but before we watch it, Mr. Blake, is there anything else you need to tell us?" "Perhaps you and Mrs. Nova should watch it first and decide for yourselves. I can come back later." No, please stay. Watch it with us. We may have questions we want to ask." Janet and James sat with their visitor on the gelato couch, which molded itself ergonomically to fit their individual frames. James dropped the hollow chip into the projector, looked at his wife for a moment, sighed heavily, and then turned to face the hollow screen, which had materialized in front of them. "Play." Jared, along with his fellow students, sat in a circle around a state-of-the-art education console called Omni Virtual 9, a supercomputer connected by the galactic internet that inputs not only information, but sights, sounds, smells, and feelings directly into a person's cerebral cortex. The children wore their sensor helmets, remote linked to the console. The daily lesson was being downloaded straight into their brains by electronic impulses, and their minds were processing information as though each student was personally experiencing the stimuli. In this case, the historic squashing of a Tuaregan slave revolt by their human masters in District 6 almost 5 years ago. The children sat motionless, postured in the most optimal way for mental alertness. The education block was silent, the walls bare. There was nothing else in the room besides the students, the education droid, which stood deactivated, other than its monitoring sensors in the corner, and the console, which was located in the middle of the classroom and reached from floor to ceiling. Suddenly, Jared's eyes flashed open, and he reached for the sensor helmet. "Pause!" William explained that during the lesson, no student was supposed to have physical awareness, and that somehow, impossibly, Jared's mind had terminated connection with the education console, and even more amazingly, was refusing to allow the console to reestablish connection. "How can he do that? What happened? Is that dangerous? Jared!" Janet was breathless, confused, scared. "What does all this mean?" James asked. "Play! Play!" The image resumed as Jared struggled to remove his sensor helmet. All of the other children remained in their comatose-like state. Whatever was happening, it was only happening to Jared. As the Novas watched, mouths agape, they saw the education droid power up in the corner. "Student Nova, you have not been authorized to disconnect from the console. Please reestablish connection now. You have 23 minutes and 11 seconds left of lesson time." Then, in a small, hollow voice that neither parent had heard from their son before, a voice so filled with fear and dread that it made chills run down Janet's spine, the boy spoke. "No, I won't. I won't. Ever!" "Student Nova, please." Jared's eyes filled with tears as he clawed desperately to release himself from the sensor helmet. "Get this off me! It's bad!" "Student Nova, you are disrupting order." Jared's tiny hands clenched into fists, his eyes shut, back arched, his mouth wide open, and from somewhere deep inside rose a guttural cry, like that of some wild creature caught in a trap, hurt and scared. "Stop!" One word was all Janet could utter through her sobs every time she caught her breath. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" And she collapsed into her husband's shaky arms. James stood dazed, holding his sobbing wife in his arms, though he himself felt like his legs could fail at any moment. After several seconds, he composed himself enough to speak. "Intercom on," he said. "Jared, please come to the family room, son." "Okay, Dad." The voice was the usual voice of the 4-year-old, innocent, sweet, carefree. Nothing like the voice on that recording. The doors of the hoverlift slid open and Jared stepped out, a toy spaceship in his hand. As he approached his parents, the boy guided his ship masterfully through an imaginary asteroid belt, making all the appropriate sound effects with his mouth. James took Jared by the hand and guided him to sit next to his mother. Then he knelt before his son so that they were at the same eye level. "Jared, did something happen at school the other day? Did something frighten you?" The boy's smile fled from his face and his eyes locked into a distant stare. I'm sorry, Daddy. I had to." James looked into his son's eyes. "Had to what, Jared? What did you have to do?" Jared's eyes slowly came back to focus on his father's. "I had to stop it." "Why did you have to stop it, son?" "It was trying to make me believe it, but it was lying." "When you tried to take the helmet off, Jared, did it hurt you?" "It was pulling inside my head, but I stopped it. I broke it." James was bewildered. He looked from his son to his wife to William. This was like trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle that had no clear image on it. Still looking into his son's eyes, James asked, "What happened, Mr. Blake? Can you make any sense of this?" Then turning to face the younger man, "You're from the government, right? Why are you interested in my son?" William slowly shook his head. "In answer to your first question, sir, I don't know what happened. And no, I can't make any sense out of it. I don't know why Jared became upset. I don't know how he disconnected from the console. I can only answer your final question. Our interest in Jared is due to what happens next on the recording. I'd like you to finish watching it before I explain." James looked at Janet, who had gained some composure, an unspoken question in his eyes. She softly nodded. "I'm ready. Go ahead." James hesitantly turned his eyes away from Janet's and back toward the view screen. Reverse 10 seconds, then play. The image resumed with Jared's anguished scream. Then, inexplicably, his sensor helmet exploded outward with such violent force that shards of metal alloy became high-speed projectiles, embedding themselves into whatever got in the way. Fortunately, Jared was standing while the other students sat below the path of the missiles. The education console, all four walls, and the education droid, which had been knocked off of its stabilizers, were sprayed with shrapnel. The students, whose link with the console had been interrupted, looked around in confusion. Jared ran for the exit door, but the droid, who had righted itself, moved in front of the doorway, blocking Jared's escape. "Move!" the young boy commanded. The education droid, designed to take an all-out attack by a class of unruly students, was thrown aside by some unseen power, causing its hollow recording to flicker, bounce, and fade out momentarily. When the droid was once again vertical, the recording showed the plastisteel exit door blown back from its frame, and Jared was gone. William stood and faced the speechless parents as Jared stared blankly at the hollow screen. He allowed them a few moments to process what they had just seen before explaining how he had come to be involved in all of this. Jared was found 3 corridors away, sitting with his knees tucked up to his chest. He was spoken to by the school principal, the counselor, and the psychologist. All 3 said Jared had no recollection of what had happened. That's when my department was notified. And apparently no one bothered to tell you about the incident. They probably wanted to avoid bad publicity. Janet reached for Jared and pulled him up onto her lap, hugging him close. "They told us they were doing some building maintenance and that the school would be closed for a week." James stared at his son, searching for some kind of answer in the boy's face. When he finally spoke, his words came out slow and measured. "Exactly what department are you with, Mr. Blake?" "We are a research complex, known only as the agency. I am the agent in charge of unexplained affairs, and my department's sole purpose is to find answers and try to explain the unexplained. I know it sounds very cloak and dagger, but all I want is to help you find some answers. The district school system won't take Jared back. They're afraid of him. Besides, I think your son requires special attention that no school is equipped to give him anyway. And that's why I'd like to take over as Jared's course instructor. The agency has immense resources, and I would personally guarantee the education and safety of your child in a controlled environment." James fixed his eyes on William. "You want to study him, like a lab rat, see if there's some way you can use him." Then he clamped his mouth closed to stop himself from saying any more. There was something about William that he liked, something that made him want to trust him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake, this has all been a bit much to take in. My wife and I need time to talk to Jared, then decide what to do next. How can we contact you?" "I understand your skepticism. It's hard to know who to trust nowadays. I'll admit, I do want to find out how Jared did those things, but I would never do anything without your approval." William paused. "I had a son of my own, who would have been just a bit older than Jared, but 2 years ago I lost him when a hover bus crashed into his school." William paused as he choked back the emotion that threatened to overtake him. Handing James his card, William continued, "When you've had to think about it, just punch the following 18-digit code into your communications console and ask for extension 91. As the Nova showed William to the door, Janet gently placed her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry about your son," she said. "We'll be in touch soon." So that was chapter 1 of A Child Shall Rise. They're very short chapters. It's a pretty fast-moving, short book. I hope that you enjoyed the first chapter, and that was enough to make you want to come back and hear the continuing story of young Jared and his family and William Blake. It's a story that has lots of twists, lots of excitement, lots of action, and I had a fun writing it, and I'm having fun again reading it. It's been over years since I've read it. All right, well, I'm Buck, and this has been The Power of Words, and come back soon for Chapter 2 of A Child Shall Rise.